Good afternoon. This is Ron.
Ron, it's Dennis from the Australian Rock Show. How are you?
I am fantastic, Dennis. How's it going? Thanks for calling, and I appreciate the opportunity.
You've had an extremely busy 2019, and 2020 is looking even busier for you. You are still touring your highly acclaimed Fight Like a Band album. You've just signed a new deal with High Vol Music and have another new album due out in April. You seem to be busier than ever, and importantly, there's plenty of markets around the world for new Ron Keel rock and roll.
Man, it's crazy, Dennis. If you had told me in 1985, when The Right to Rock was released, my first major label album project produced by Gene Simmons, if you told me then, Ron, 35 years from now, you'll be doing your first ever tour of Australia and Canada, I would have thought you were crazy. I didn't know that I would even live this long, much less live to see dreams like this come true. But I am really appreciative of the opportunity. And, you know, I like to stay busy. I love what I do. I love entertaining people and meeting new fans and friends around the world. And 2020 is turning into really my first world tour since the mid-'80s.
It's good stuff. And I guess, what can you tell us about South by South Dakota? From what I've read, it's a tribute album to many Southern rock greats, with covers of the Allmans, Skinner, Outlaws, Molly Hatchet, 38 Special, Blackfoot, and more.
And we're really excited about this new album from Ron Keel Band, South by South Dakota, releasing April 24th on High Vol Music. And I have several important things I want to hit on about that project. First of all, it was totally organic. As we were in the studio recording the Fight Like a Band album last year, we would warm up in the morning or loosen up or maybe even unwind at the end of the session by just jamming some of our favorite Southern rock cover songs and some of the songs that have been a part of the show for the past 5 years. And I had no idea that my co-producer and engineer, Mike Dresch, was recording those sessions. But of course, I should have known. Mike records everything. And when we got into the project, I started listening back to some of these recordings thinking, man, this is just great stuff. They're tried and true songs. Train from Blackfoot and Flirting with Disaster from Molly Hatchet. And, you know, we already had Ghost Riders in the Sky, which was our debut single, the Outlaws classic. And an album's worth of songs basically in the can. And I thought it would be a great treat for the fans and something that I would certainly be very proud of and give us a bridge between Fight Like a Band and the new original album coming next year in 2021. So, it came out, I don't know if this is good or bad, but listening to the mixes now that the record's done, I'm extremely proud of it. It's actually heavier than Fight Like a Band, even though it's a collection of Southern rock classic covers from all of those iconic bands like Skinner and Molly Hatchet, Outlaws, Marshall Tucker Band, and so forth. There's a real heavy sound to this record, and some of the songs are true to the originals, and some of them we took a lot of liberties and just made them our own.
And I can't wait to hear the duet you do with Jasmine Cain on Don't Misunderstand Me, the old Rossington Collins tune from their 1980 Anytime, Anyplace, Anywhere LP, which incidentally was that band's most successful single.
It's a great duet. Jasmine Cain is a rock goddess and a good friend of mine and a perfect choice to sing that duet, which is a pretty obscure track. You're right. It was their big single, their signature song, and fits perfectly on this album. And I'm really proud of it. It's cool that we've got a new product coming soon from High Vol Music. And I'm also obviously extremely excited to bring the classic Ron Keel show to Australia for Melodic Rock Fest and the tour dates leading up to Melodic Rock Fest. There won't be a whole lot of Southern rock covers in the Ron Keel show for Melodic Rock Fest. In fact, I don't think we're doing any of those, but we do have Rock and Roll Outlaw, which is the genesis of my Metal Cowboy history, so to speak, when we covered the Rose Tattoo Classic in 1987 with Keel for the Dudes movie soundtrack. We were chosen to record that song for the soundtrack and to be able to cover an Australian legend like Rose Tattoo. And I I can guarantee you that song will be in the show. I hope that the fans will accept our version and appreciate the fact that that song's been a big part of my career for a long time. And you're also going to hear all the Keel classics, the Ron Keel Band, Fight Like a Band songs, some Steeler, even some Black Sabbath. So I'm trying to cover all the bases in a solid 1 hour show for Melodic Rock Fest and the club dates leading up to the big festival.
Wonderful. Were you a fan of Rose Tattoo, or how did that come about?
I was obviously a fan of Rose Tattoo, and I was familiar with the song. This is back in 1987, and the producer of the film, Penelope Spheris, who had also done The Decline of Western Civilization, the infamous Hollywood documentary, she chose that song. That was her idea. She wanted that song to be the signature song of the film, Dudes, and she wanted Keel to cover it, and we were honored to step up to the challenge, and it's been a signature song throughout my entire career. And I think, really, it was the genesis of the Metal Cowboy. That opportunity to wear a cowboy hat and shoot guns and ride horses and scream some great three-chord bluesy rock and roll was certainly resonated, struck a chord within me. It struck three chords, actually. I'm still doing it to this day.
Mate, let's go back, if we can, to Jasmine Cain. And for listeners that aren't aware, she's a Dakota native, mind you, is an absolute powerhouse singer and monster bass player. And if you dig heavy-duty rock and roll and motorcycles, I encourage everyone to check her out. She has a new album out called Seven, which I think is a pretty good place to start.
Absolutely. And I just did, last August, we did the Sturgis Rally together in Sturgis, South Dakota, the big motorcycle rally, which is an annual celebration for us. That's our kind of event. Jasmine Cain and the Ron Keel Band were on the same bill at the same venue, and Jasmine actually sang Don't Misunderstand Me, the duet with me live on stage at the Sturgis Rally, and gave me a copy of that album, Seven. And we had literally a 7-hour drive the next day to the next gig, and I put in the album because I wanted to listen to Jasmine's album top to bottom on the drive, and we put it in, and we just kept it playing, man. That album, it was the only CD in the player on the entire drive. We listened to it over and over again. She really is a powerhouse. You pegged it, and highly recommended. Please visit her at jasminecain.com, and I'm sure that single, Don't Misunderstand Me, the duet between Jasmine and myself, will be a pretty big hit, video, single, and so forth later on this summer.
Good stuff. So, Ron, you are in Australia for the first time as part of the Melodic Rock Fest taking place in Melbourne from March 6th to 8th, as well as side shows in Newcastle, Sydney and Brisbane. Now, as someone who bought the Right to Rock album back in 85 and have followed much of your rock and roll journey, I have to ask, what took you so long to tour Australia?
It took a man like Peter Hoffman, the promoter of Melodic Rock Fest, to say, yes, we want Ron Keel and we're going to make it happen. Really, it's all out of my hands. If I could snap my fingers and go anywhere I wanted to go and play wherever I wanted to play, man, I would be everywhere. But it's a team effort. It takes people on the business side of things, like Peter Hoffman, to pull the trigger and to do everything right. And Peter and his team have assembled an amazing lineup for this festival. I mean, we're looking at, Firehouse, Reckless Love, FM, just so many great bands. Janet Gardner from Vixen, XYZ, Enough's Enough. There's just Tony Harnell, Kip Winger. What an incredible lineup, and I'm just really proud to be a part of it.
Okay, so Keel toured Japan in October of '86 on the Final Frontier tour. Many bands back then would have included Australia after Japan. Was that ever a consideration at that time, as the band did have their albums gain a release in Australia? Although thinking back, I don't recall much record label support or media support for Keel, and any press which I read was largely via import magazines.
Well, as far as I can recall, Dennis, the Right to Rock was very well received in Australia. I don't know if there was any discussion of touring there. I believe we should have. I'm sorry it's taken me this long, but in a couple of weeks, I'm going to make up for lost time, and I'm going to give you 35 years worth of great rock and roll and a lot of new memories to celebrate.
We're looking forward to it. Now, I could talk a lot about your rock and roll history, but I do purposely want to keep the questions contemporary, as you do have a new album out called Fight Like a Band. That I want to focus on. But if I may, I also want to ask a couple of questions about 2014's Metal Cowboy album, which I and many others thought was the strongest, most complete album you had made. And it really did, as you have stated, fuse metal with country, or AC/DC meets Skinner.
Thank you for that compliment, and that's exactly how I feel about it. I'm glad that people like you and many of the fans and our audience and people that have followed the twists and turns of my career, I'm glad and really appreciative that many of them feel the same way about that album. It was the first time in my career where I could say I wrote all the songs, and I had a great lineup of musicians. I mean, Mike Vanderhule from Y&T on drums, Frank Hannon from Tesla on lead guitar, my bass player from Keel and Ron Keel Band, Gino Arce, who's been with me for 22 years now. And it was the first time that I was able to really put that vision into musical terms with a great batch of songs. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. I think I wrote about 50 songs for that project until I came up with the very first one that was a keeper, and that's the song called The Last Ride. When I heard The Last Ride, and I did the demo at home, and I said, this is Metal Cowboy music. It's absolutely perfect. It's got the energy, the excitement, the electricity of arena rock, but it's got some of that twang, some of that Wild West attitude, that cowboy spirit, so to speak, and still allows me to be myself and who I am at this stage of the game. And as I've evolved through the years musically, I've been able to combine the best of what I did back in the 80s with songs like The Right to Rock and Tears of Fire and Because the Night and Somebody's Waiting being re-recorded for last year's Fight Like a Band album. Now, we've got a very diverse array of songs on the new album, but those Keel classics, to me, sound like they belong on that record. They fit right in sonically, and from an attitude standpoint, it hasn't changed much, man. We're singing about the same stuff, about working hard, playing hard, partying hard, having a good time, and appreciating life one moment at a time, one day at a time, one song at a time. So the message in my music has never changed, but the sound and the textures that it's basically like an artist just adding more colors to the palette, being able to paint the picture with a wide variety of colors and take the audience and the listeners on a journey that it's just one hell of a ride. And I'm glad that the Australian audience is going to be able to share that with me at these shows.
That's an excellent way to explain it. And if I could just go back to Metal Cowboy for a little bit, from the album opener, if I think Long Gone Bad, there's the anthemic Wild Forever, the super heavy My Bad, which you described as Black Sabbath with a banjo. Mate, so many killer tunes on Metal Cowboy. To me, this seemed like the album you had been threatening to make for a long, long time, and it must have been gratifying, I guess, that so many people also thought it was the best thing you had done.
Extremely gratifying. And, the only problem with making a record like that is that what do you do for an encore?
Sure.
I intend on, and this is a common argument amongst artists of my generation, guys that had some hits back in the day that are still out there creating and releasing new albums in a totally different musical climate these days. Why do you keep doing it? There is money to be made if you do it right, but that really is not a factor for me. For me, I have to continue challenging myself and keep creating and keep doing what I was born to do. It's really the only life I've ever known. It's the life that I chose. And that Metal Cowboy record certainly was the biggest step towards realizing and fulfilling my true destiny. And not that, I treasure the past, Dennis. I love the songs from the 80s that made me who I am, that got me in front of millions of people. And we had 3 consecutive albums on the top 100 on the Billboard charts, and so many dreams come true, and touring with Bon Jovi and Motley Crue and Aerosmith and Van Halen. And, I'm extremely appreciative of all of those memories. I treasure the past, but I live for today. We're only guaranteed today. I'm on a one-day contract. We never know what tomorrow might hold. I'm going to fulfill my end of the deal and deliver my end of the contract every day while I'm here, and also continue to work for the future. I want to create new songs and release new songs, and whether people, some of them resonate, some of them don't, but the response to the Fight Like a Band album, and the Metal Cowboy album as well, but Fight Like a Band has really struck a chord in audiences, both the fans from the 80s that have always enjoyed what I did, and the new Ron Keel fans that are enjoying what I do now. And I think it's a perfect balance and an honest statement of who I am and what I do. And I'm still pushing myself extremely hard. I sing every verse, every note, every scream like it's the last. And I want to deliver that power and energy and passion with every vocal track that I do. And I think that's been my signature trademark, no matter what style of music I've recorded and released or created.
Before I get off Metal Cowboy, there are a couple of other tunes, and I've got it here with me on that album I also want to mention, one being Cowboy Road with Frank Hannon really playing his ass off on that tune. In fact, the whole album, and also the country tune, I think there's one called Singers, Hookers and Thieves with your old mate Paul Shortino from Rough Cut.
That's right.
Which lyrically is almost autobiographical.
The whole album is autobiographical, and I realized that after I wrote it and recorded it, there's a lot of I, me, we, it's really my life story. And coincidentally, the album was released on the same day as my autobiography, Even Keel, Life on the Streets of Rock and Roll. That was calculated, and the album is kind of an accompanying soundtrack to my book, because it really is. And I try and do that with every project and every album. There's a great balance between writing about yourself and writing about your personal experiences and your emotions, and then also being able to tell stories and take a fictional standpoint. Singers, Hookers, and Thieves is one of those. I'm kind of populating my world with some of these characters, and some of them are singers, some of them are hookers, some of them are thieves, but that was my shower song, Dennis. I actually wrote, we all love to sing in the shower, right? And I actually do love to sing in the shower. And I literally wrote the entire song, the lyrics anyway, in the shower with a Sharpie on it was a dry erase board because I'm really tall. And I had this thing hanging up in the shower, and I would come up with a line or two, and I'd write it down and, kind of save that dry erase board. Next time I take a shower, I'd add a verse or a chorus or a bridge. So that song was actually written and sung for the first time in the shower. It is a song in 3/4 time, which is technically a waltz, and that's not a real rock and roll format. It's a country song with a screaming rock vocal from Ron Keel and Paul Shortino. That's another thing I love about that Metal Cowboy record, is that contrast, that the fact that you can take instruments like the dobro and pipe them through a Marshall stack, and it gives you that nasty rattlesnake Southwest cowboy sound.
Talking about Frank Hannon, I note that he continues to be pretty busy with his own podcast and also his own beer, the Heavy Metal Hippie Double IPA. Dave Ellefson has his own coffee. Anthrax and Maiden, of course, have their own beers. The obvious question, will there be a Ron Keel beer?
I am working with a company actually to create a Ron Keel brand of whiskey. And, everybody's got beer and wine and coffee. I'm a whiskey guy, Dennis, and I am speaking to a brewery or distillery in South Dakota to brand a Metal Cowboy flavored whiskey. And if the only reason it hasn't happened yet is just because I'm extremely busy with the music. I do a lot of stuff too, the merchandising and the radio show and the podcast and the subscription site at patreon.com/Ron Keel, where I do a lot of hands-on FaceTime interaction with my fans and the Keelaholics. But it all starts with the music, man. Without the songs, without performing and singing and writing and touring, that stuff wouldn't be happening. So I am extremely diligent about rehearsing. I sing for 2 or 3 hours a day. I practice. That's something that got instilled in me at a very early age, was practice, practice, practice. I do not wait until showtime to deliver the goods. I try and prepare as much as I can and keep my voice in shape, keep my body in shape, and be able to perform and sing at the highest level possible, because that's where it all comes from. Without the voice and the songs and the show, we wouldn't have a radio show or a whiskey brand or a book or any of that other stuff.
Can I just, going on from that, Ron, that after almost, 35 years, your voice is as strong as ever. Do you do anything to preserve your voice?
I do. I have warm-up exercises and a technique that I learned in the early 80s from an amazing teacher in Los Angeles, that I still employ those warm-up techniques. I try and speak properly. As you can tell, I'm speaking strong with a loud tone. I don't like to whisper, man. You know, that's the worst thing for me. You start whispering, your voice is going to go out the window. Keeping your body in good shape and hitting the gym, no matter how bad it hurts, and practicing. Literally going downstairs in my rehearsal room here at the Keel house and getting ready for the Melodic Rock Fest tour. And so you get to find out what works for you. Rest is critical. But, I found that the voice comes from the heart, man. There's no amount of, you can't control how many interviews you do in a day and how much you have to talk. And I love the media and stuff like we're doing right now. It's an important part of my job. I also have a life and a family, and I've got responsibilities, and I can't always do what's best for my voice. But when the time comes, you dig deep, you find that voice in your heart, in your soul. The voice comes from the heart, man. Where the voice leads, I'll follow. And you really have to want to sing well, and you have to do your best every day. And it does change with the climate. I mean, last week I was on the Monsters of Rock cruise. I went from 20 below zero here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I live. It's the dead of winter here, to Cozumel, Mexico, and Belize on the Monsters of Rock cruise. That was 100-degree temperature swing. It has a drastic effect on the guitars. You can tell when you pick up your guitar, it's in shock because of the climate change. Imagine what your little vocal cords are going through, and the other muscles and parts of your anatomy are going through as you go through the 26-hour flight to Melbourne that I'm going to endure. And then as soon as I get there, I've got a day off and then a couple of rehearsals, and you just have to be careful with it. But you also have to. I don't save anything. I don't hold back. I don't sing soft. I don't do it halfway, man. I cannot. Every song that I sing, whether it's in a rehearsal or in front of 70,000 people, I sing it like it's the last time I'm ever going to step up to that microphone, man. I have no choice. I have one gear, pedal to the metal, and I give it all I've got and do the best I can.
Let's talk a little bit about your current album, Fight Like a Band, which is a super strong record top to bottom. I just mentioned Dave Ellefson. I know the album is released on EMP Outlaw Records, a division of Dave's EMP label group. How did that come about, signing with EMP?
Well, Dave and I are old friends, and we appreciate the opportunity that he and Tom Hazard gave us to launch the Ron Keel Band in that fine fashion. And, Dave is somebody that I certainly admire as a longtime friend, musician, and an entrepreneur, a guy who's got his coffee and his books and his bass clinics and his work with Megadeth and his solo album that he did last year. And just a perfect situation for us. And now we've moved on to Highball Music, which is the next logical step for us. We have amazing distribution through Amped. And Bill Chavis, president of Highball Music, is an old friend of mine. 20 years we've watched each other evolve and stayed in touch and always wanted to work together. And we're looking forward to the next chapter and thanking Dave Ellefson and EMP for getting us started.
You wrote all the tunes on Metal Cowboy, but Fight Like a Band is very much a collaborative band effort. Was that a conscious decision on your part to write the album as a band?
It was. And I wasn't sure how it was going to work. But, these guys, and the title track says it all. I don't, if we have a minute or three, I'll go into a little deeper backstory of the foundation of that album. But we moved to Sioux Falls together, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which, I had never even been here. I've never played here, never set foot on Sioux Falls. It was a foreign territory to me until 2014 when I was hired to spearhead a business called Badlands Pawn. And this is was a $70 million entertainment mecca. It was a pawn shop, a concert venue, a radio station with a house band and a deli and a casino and a bar, which is Disneyland for redneck rock and rollers like me. And the owner of the business chose me to be the voice and the face of that franchise, both as the leader of the house band and a host of the midday radio show every day on the number one rock station in this region, and basically gave me the keys to the castle and the opportunity to put together my dream team. So I assembled my dream band, including Dave Cawthorn on lead guitar, who's going to be in Australia with me for all these shows. My bass player, Gino Arce, who's been with me for 22 years. He's the bass player in Keel and Ron Keel Band. He was the bass player in Iron Horse. We are tighter than brothers, and we've been through a lot together these last couple of decades. So I just pulled together these guys, and we all relocated to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and we had literally all the dreams come true all over again with the tour bus and the big effects and the budget and the production and the opportunity to tour the nation across country in the U.S. for that year, which was 2015, 2016. And it was an amazing opportunity. I was very well paid. I was the voice and the face of a very high-profile entertainment franchise, and I had my dream team band, and I could pretty much kind of write my own ticket in terms of the musical direction of the band. So it was Metal Cowboy on steroids. I mean, we were doing all these Southern rock. That's where all these Southern rock covers came from. We were doing all these Blackfoot and Skinner and Molly Hatchet and stuff like that, Creedence. After a very short time, a little over a year, that business did not succeed, and all of a sudden, the plug was pulled. We had no more support, no more infrastructure, no more opportunity, but we had one hell of a band. And I went to the guys, Dave and Gino, and our drummer, Jeff Kohler, who is he and our keyboard player, Dakota Scott Schmidt, both members of the South Dakota Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I went to them and I said, look, guys, we got a great thing here. We all decided, no, we're not going anywhere. We're going to stick this out. We started fresh, and I bought an RV and I bought a truck, and we kept the crew, and we kept the momentum going and rebranded that as the Ron Keel Band. That's when the Ron Keel Band was born. Well, within 3 weeks of that, my wife, Renee, was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. And all of a sudden, this fresh new start that we're all fired up about, I had to go to the guys and say, man, I'm not going to be able to tour in 2017 because I've got to stay home and I've got to take care of Renee as she goes through radiation, chemotherapy. What is it? I lost count. I think it's 8, maybe 9 surgeries. And the only option, and the guys stuck with me, Dennis, they could have all gone elsewhere and done other things, but they had my back. They were my support group through the entire process, and they just stopped at the store, got a bottle of whiskey and a bunch of beer and brought their guitars, and they all came over to my house. We sat in my basement, and we wrote Fight Like a Band. We wrote that album together, and that's how the collaboration happened. And the fact is they had great ideas. I didn't just let them participate. Their ideas demanded to be heard. They had some amazing transitions and chords and riffs and musical passages that just felt very natural to me and to the direction of the band. And a lot of the lyrics for that album came out of that experience. Fight Like a Band, the title track, you can tell from the first verse, when I'm talking about the cancer diagnosis. And it was very painful to sing that first verse in the studio and get through it without breaking down. But that is another autobiographical record, like Metal Cowboy from a few years ago. Fight Like a Band is exactly who we are, what we did, and what we went through during that transition. And now my wife is fine. She's cancer-free, and she's healthy. She's beautiful. And we're all better for the experience. I know that's strange to say. How can you be better after going through something like that? But we have an even deeper appreciation for life, music, love, friendships, and we're going to treasure every song, every day, every moment, every memory.
It's wonderful. It's very, very positive.
I think you have to stay positive, man. And my wife has written a book about her experiences during that bout with cancer, which I contributed to. It's called Anything But Pink, and it's available on her website, reneekeel.com. And I was able to tell the story of how the band evolved through her bout with cancer and tell my side of the story from a husband's and a caregiver's perspective. And that experience, man, there's nothing like it, man. And we believe it. We feel it. It's not just lip service. The guys in this band love each other, and we talk to each other every day, and we can't wait to get back on stage together. I wish I was bringing them all to Australia with me, but I am bringing Dave, DC Cawthorn, and really excited to be able to perform with some amazing musicians. The guys in White Widow backing me up on this Australian tour. And I've had some amazing long-distance discussions with Enzo and Gavin and the guys, and Ben. I want to thank Jules Millis, the band leader and lead vocalist for White Widow, who was really instrumental in getting Peter Hoffman's attention and saying, we got to get Ron over here to Australia. But I'm excited to work with these new musicians for the Australian tour. And my band means a lot to me, but for the next 3 weeks, White Widow and Enzo and Gavin and Ben, these guys are my band. And Enzo Almanzi on guitar, Ben Webster on bass, Gavin Hill on drums. That's my band. And DC Cawthorn from the Ron Keel Band, he'll be with me to kind of bridge the gap and provide some consistency. This guy knows every song that I've ever done, and we work together like telepathically. So really excited that I can have the best of both worlds and bring some of the Ron Keel Band to Australia and have some of the best Australian musicians with us on stage as well.
Let me just, I don't mean to be shifting around here. I just got a couple more questions about the new album. The album opens with a bone-crushing Road Ready, which has a lyrical twist by including many of the song titles from your career. It's almost like you were paying tribute to yourself on that one.
That's exactly what I was doing, Dennis. How many song titles or phrases from my career could you find in that song?
Several.
20. There's 20. Trust me. There's 20 phrases from throughout my career and throughout my history that are song titles or phrases from songs from Steeler, Iron Horse, Keel, Fair Game, and all my other projects. And it started as, I had the music done. Dave wrote the music for the track, and I'm trying to put lyrics to it. And I used a couple of those lines just as, quote, placeholders, just to kind of, they had the right amount of syllables and they fit. And I sang one line. I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And I sang another line. I thought, well, let's just go ahead and see how many of these classic Keelisms can we possibly incorporate into this lyric. So it really did end up being a tribute not only to me, but to my history and the fans that have enjoyed those songs and that history and that journey with me. So it's a tribute to all of us and all the Keelaholics who have stayed with me and enjoyed the journey.
What about Rock and Roll Guitar? Love that one. It's kind of like Jukebox Hero Part 2.
It is certainly, you can draw the comparisons to Jukebox Hero on Rock and Roll Guitar. I had written, it was originally an idea for a novel that I was going to write. I was going to write the story of a guitar, an old 1959 Les Paul, as it aged and traveled through different hands of different musicians, a blues guy or a jazz guy, or, I went to the pawn shop, and then it traveled across the world, and kind of telling the story of this guitar through the guitar's perspective. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to have time to finish this novel, but it'd make a pretty good song. So I started writing the song, and it had like 75 verses. Eventually, I had to cut it down to where the guitar just had 3 different owners, but it passes from one hand to the other. And there's magic in that guitar, and I think there's some magic in that song as well. So, and that's one of those story songs. It doesn't come from real experience. I didn't live that. It's not a autobiographical piece, but it's a story. And I love that about country music. It taught me to do that. It taught me to be able to tell a story and write a song. And Jukebox Hero is the same thing, but it's the same kind of approach. These kids, you got to pass it on to the new generation. And we had a young kid, 16-year-old Eli Dykstra, play the end solo on that track, rock and roll guitar. This kid is he's the new guitar hero phenom. I mean, he's 16 years old and absolutely amazing. And so I thought it was appropriate for, at the end of the song, I hand the guitar to him, and he just takes off on that outro solo and just shreds it.
The album also includes a couple of re-recorded Keel tunes, including Tears of Fire. What prompted you to do that?
Well, first of all, it was not about trying to. It's not a royalty issue or a legal thing or master ownership or any of that crap. It was the desire to take another shot at those tunes, man, because my voice has come a long way, and I'm not happy with the vocals on the original versions. In fact, I cannot listen to them, and I know that a lot of the fans are still tied to those original versions because that's what they heard when they were growing up. Sonically and vocally, they don't compare to these new versions. I just felt like these songs are such an important part of my life, an important part of my career. I really want one more shot at it to be able to sing them strong, with confidence, in tune, with all the experience that I've got, in the last 35 years. And trust me, Dennis, I've had a lot of practice on those songs the last few decades. So that was my primary goal. But, however, it goes even deeper than that, because when we went in the studio to cut those, that's all we had. That's what got us to deal with EMP, because I didn't have any new original songs. I just knew that when my wife was diagnosed with cancer and I couldn't tour, obviously the light bulb goes off over the top of my head and says, man, we're going to make an album. We have to make an album. But we don't have any songs. So the logical conclusion was to go in and record the Keel songs that we've been doing in the show anyway. These songs have been a part of every Ron Keel band show since day one. And we just went in the studio and cut those 4 Keel songs. And that sealed the deal with Dave Ellison and EMP. And now we had at least a foundation for the album, and we had a deal in place. Now we can sit down and take some of the pressure off and just get creative and write the rest of Fight Like a Band.
I could talk all day about each tune on Fight Like a Band. It's top to bottom. It's such a strong album, yet with much diversity of style. And I guess along with Metal Cowboy is probably the most complete album you have released. Yet I have to tell you, as I'm a sucker for melody and hooks, my 2 favourite tunes on the album are Heart's Gone Wild and Long Way Down, which is, to me, they're the album's picks. Super melodic, ton of hooks, sing-along chorus, a radio hit, Ron, if such a thing existed nowadays.
Well, I appreciate that, and I couldn't agree with you more. I am extremely proud and pleased with both of those songs and how they came out, and the message and the feel, just the melody, the way they came together, and those are 2 very special songs, and I'm glad you feel the same way I do.
Okay, now can I, before we finish up, and I'm nearly done, can I make mention of your book, which was released maybe 6 years back now, called Even Keel? Ron, I've read a lot of rock bios, but yours has an honesty and an unpretentiousness about it that many others lack. There's a ton of great rock stories, but it's also a human interest story. You know, the story of a working class kid who became a rock star growing up in Arizona, moving to Nashville, stories of Steeler, the move to Hollywood, and so much more. I guess, if anything, it's a life story, not a glorification of the excessive lifestyle of a rock star.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, Dennis. And you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what it is. I took a different perspective when writing the book. I just wanted to tell the stories that were special to me. I didn't want to throw anybody under the bus or trash my ex-bandmates or trash my ex-wives. I did not want to glorify the excess, the sex, the drugs, the adultery, whatever. I wanted to be honest, and the only person in the book that gets thrown under the bus is myself. I copped all the stuff that I did. I'm not necessarily proud of, but the mother of my children, even she's off limits. She's the mother of my kids, so she's not going to get dragged through the mud, even though there was some pretty ugly stuff there. And I felt that I did pull back on the sex and drugs to a huge extent because I wanted it to be about the journey and the music. And then the book came out in 2014, and a lot of the reviews and the interviews in the media were people would get on like you and I, and they'd ask me, well, Ron, man, there's an awful lot of sex and drugs in this book, man. I'm not thinking, dude, you have no idea. But a lot's changed since I wrote it, and I am now enjoying the opportunity to rewrite it in audiobook form and read it into a microphone myself, some of which has been very painful for me to do, is releasing the book in audio format. Sometimes it's sheer joy. It's amazing and a thrill. And sometimes it's not so much fun, man, but I got to tell the story the way it's told and adding some pieces to that puzzle that have changed in the last 5 or 6 years since I wrote it and released it, because a lot's happened and a lot's going to continue to keep happening. So I think the autobiography will be a work in progress for a long time to come.
Ron, you were on the 1980s LA metal scene pretty much from its beginning. Question, was there one band that came out of that scene that you thought should have gone on to bigger and better things but didn't?
Keel. It can always get bigger and better, Dennis. It was big. It was good. It was big, man. But it can always get bigger and better. And you can look at certain bands and try and figure out why it did or didn't happen, whether it was the record label or the choice of single. Those are usually the two culprits, because everybody got a record deal, man. Everybody was signed. Some are still alive and kicking today, and some did not achieve the level of success we thought they would. Certainly Black and Blue comes to mind, because I felt that Black and Blue was the American Def Leppard. I felt like they were the one band that could really break out and break huge. Now they did all right, and they're still out there today. I saw them last week on the cruise. Jamie and Patrick and the guys in Black and Blue are good friends of mine. But back then, in 82, 83, that was the band you would have pegged as being the next Pyromania or Hysteria. That was our Def Leppard. And for whatever reason, I have my own thoughts on that, but that is a great band whose music was great then and still stands the test of time today. Great songs, great production, and just a great show as well. So that's the one that maybe didn't get as far as we thought they would.
Ron, thanks so much for finally making it down to Australia. We encourage all listeners to get out and see you on tour. I will give all the tour dates at the end of this interview. Before you go, every guest on our show gets to select a song by an Australian band, something which is significant to them. What would you like to choose and why?
Dennis, if I'm going to pick one Australian band to feature at the end of this interview, it's got to be White Widow. My buddies Jules and Javier, Enzo, Ben, Gavin, White Widow, and a fantastic cut, the title track to their 2014 album. How about Crossfire? Is that cool?
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's crank that.
Do it.
Ron, thank you again for your time today, and look forward to seeing you down under very, very shortly.
My pleasure, Dennis. I'll see you in Melbourne, I take it?
I'm off to Sydney, mate.
Sydney. All right, then. So I just want to make sure I have my calendar full, make sure I see you in Sydney and get a handshake, and thank you for all your support, brother.